right, we will reconvene, I guess is the technical word, for the budget hearings for 2018, October 14th. It's 10:30, and our presentation now is from the juvenile judges, and if you could introduce your team.
Thank you. I'm Dave Himanowski.
We're recording it.
I'm sorry?
We're recording it, so.
Yes, thank you. I'm Dave Himanowski. I'm the probate and juvenile court judge. To my right is Katie Stenman, who's court administrator for the probate and juvenile court. To my left, your right, is Karen Watkins, who's our fiscal services department head, our chief financial officer, if you will, who I know you often see here when we have financial requests coming before you in your regular sessions. Here today to talk to you about both the juvenile and the probate budgets. We did hear actually from Cy and Commissioner Benton just before we started the good news that the approved COIC budget, which is included as part of the total juvenile and probate court budget, which the COIC board, which includes Commissioner Benton, approved at their meeting last Thursday, was actually only $617,000 for Delaware County, as opposed to the $672 that we had in our budget proposal to you. So right there's $55,000.
Wow.
Pardon me, which I'd love to take credit for.
Are you taking credit for that, or Commissioner Benton?
I just say I'd love to take credit for it, but I can't. We can take credit for it in one way, which is that we have made a concerted effort over the last few years to find appropriate alternatives to the use of detention. It is very easy when a juvenile comes into court and that juvenile has run away, engaged in bad behavior, gotten in trouble at school, had an argument with their parents, to say, well, sit in detention. It is certainly the option that requires the least work at that point for our staff and the least planning for us. But it's not always the best option. In fact, it's often not the best option for the juvenile in those circumstances. And what we have to look at in each of those cases is really the public safety issue that's presented there. Is there a public safety issue presented here that requires the confinement of this 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old in order to reduce the risk of some harm happening to them or to the people around them or to the general public? And that's what the statutes require us to do. We have tried very, very hard over the last 2.5, 3 years, and had tried very hard over the years before that, when Judge Spicer was here, to find appropriate alternatives to detention, because our share of the detention cost is based on what percentage of the detention bed days we are using, as opposed to what Union, Madison, and Champaign counties are using, and what we're running out to other counties, predominantly Franklin County. Not 5 years ago, our COIC budget line was almost $750,000. In fact, I recall one year that it was in excess of $800,000. And here we are at $617,000 for next year. So it's working. Those efforts are working. I'm not sure we can get a whole lot lower than $617,000.
Yeah, well, and actually,
there's a base cost to just keep the doors open.
Right,
so,
and that's what's interesting about that budget. They have some issues. They've gone to the point where they've solicited, actively solicited other counties to send their juveniles there, and it's helping. I mean, their population is going up, but the other 4 counties is actually generally trending down, and they've got some issues with mental health. That seems to be on the increase, and they don't really have the adult mental health programs available to those juveniles, so they struggle with that.
It's really no different in the juvenile delinquency realm than it is in the adult criminal realm, that what we have found is because of the manner in which those mental health conditions often demonstrate themselves in outward behavior, we see folks, whether they are juveniles or adults, who have mental health diagnoses and untreated mental health conditions engaging in behaviors that result in their confinement. And that puts the pressure, and I'm sure you've heard this from the sheriff, that puts the pressure on the detention facilities to become de facto mental health facilities. And obviously it's that treatment is needed, but it's also very expensive for the facilities to do that. I did send you all an email, and this fluctuates from month to month. Some number of months ago, I want to say maybe 6 or so months ago, our population is right around 200,000 now, depending upon whose estimate you go by. But I think the expectation was we would pass 200,000 this year. Pardon me. The other 3 counties Madison, Champaign, and Union combined, I think, are in the ballpark of 135.
Yeah, they're well under 200.
So maybe upwards of 150,000. There was a point, I haven't looked at the numbers this month, but when I sent you that email, we were fourth of the 4 counties in usage of the detention facilities. So despite the fact that we were a larger population than the other 3 counties combined, they were each using more bed days at the facility than we were. And I think to a large extent that is, it can be credited to the fact that we also have the financial resources to have programs in the community to prevent from sending kids to detention.
Right.
I don't think my staff, as much as I think my staff is working very hard, I don't think my staff is working any harder than Judge Ufinger's staff in Union County is working. They're working very hard too. And I don't mean that as a knock against my staff. I mean that to not be a knock against Judge Ufinger's staff in Union County or the staffs in Madison and Champaign County. But I think we also have the ability to provide some services that they don't. So didn't come here to necessarily talk to you about COIC, but I was very glad to hear that.
And actually, the way the formula works, it's a 4-year rolling average, so our percentage
It's trending down.
has stabilized at 22, 23%, but right now we're still at 29%.
On the 4-year average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next 2 or 3 years, if we maintain our population at
Should pull
22,
that.
we should see reductions in that number. So we'll see.
The flip side of that, which is a necessary consequence of that, is that the other counties' costs are going up, and they don't have the dollars necessarily to do that, which creates some stresses, I'm sure, among the commissioners when you meet to discuss.
And what's interesting, too, is the jail is full. The center's full, and they have high-risk patients.
At the moment, we've actually moved the 2 female residents to Logan County.
Right.
And are paying to house them in Logan County.
Right.
In order to take the female wing and put additional male juveniles in that wing, not necessarily because the population is so high, but because that, because that population has some mental health issues. There are a few folks, I think, not from Delaware County, but there are a few folks in the facility who are on, I don't want to call it suicide watch, but who are on a more heightened watch.
Yeah.
There are some inmates, again, I don't think from Delaware County, but who are some juveniles who are unable to have contact with one another. When we get in that situation, we try to send one child to COIC and one child to Marion, so that COIC doesn't have to try and maintain physical separation between the 2 of them.
It creates a strain on the staff because they have to watch, in some cases, one-on-one, 24/7. And that's an incredible strain on the resources. So anyway, some issues there, no doubt, and they're trying very hard.
But good news for us from a
financial standpoint, yeah.
And good news for us that we are sending fewer kids
Yes.
into detention,
Yes.
which is a good thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on the juvenile budget unless there are specific things you want me to address. I would note in 2015, our total budget increase was 0.28%. That reflected some changes in grants that allowed us to shift some funding out of the general fund and into grants. Last year, we were down in the ballpark of 10% because of the shift of funds over to the Domestic Relations Division. That's not me cutting 8 or 10% out of my budget. That was just a shift over. I'd love, again, to take credit for that, but I don't want to take credit for something I didn't do. But I think we have a history at the probate juvenile court in the 9 years I was court administrator there, and now in the last, this is my 3rd budget as judge, of trying to hold the line as much as we can on expenses, and our juvenile budget increase this year is 2.11%, which reflects to a large extent the 3% salary increases across the board and changes in health insurance costs. There are obviously a few other things in there. I will tell you that the original budget submission, and I tell you this defensively, I walked in and I said to County Prosecutor O'Brien, how'd it go? And she said, okay. And I said, okay. And she said, I'm not telling you any secrets here. And she said, well, as always, they're looking for places to cut to get the budget in line with income, with what they know from projections from the auditor's office that they have to spend. So I reflexively tell you, our original budget included $30,000 for a vehicle purchase, We took that, I asked Karen and Katie to take that out before we submitted it. It included a clerical position, which we are not filling. We took that out of the budget. We had a person in a position there who was part-time clerical, part-time data, who left several months ago. We are getting such good help from Steve's folks that we don't need to refill that position, and so we're just not going to. So those things have already been cut.
Well, Carol told us we could take cuts out of your budget to help.
To help hers, exactly. Sure she did. Sure she did. And I would point out that she's the one bringing me the work that requires the increase. But in all seriousness, the vehicles are an interesting thing. I told you all several years ago, and actually I'm not sure whether it was the three of you or it's been long enough ago that it was different folks sitting in these seats, may have been Commissioner Merrill and two other commissioners at that point. I don't want a fleet of new cars. I don't want to be buying new cars every year. We were perfectly happy with the used sheriff's cruisers coming to us. However, what we're hearing now is that the sheriff, being wise with his money, is hanging on to those cruisers longer, and that they are, by the time the sheriff's office is done with them, they're not in a condition that they're coming back. I think you may have had some conversations with other companies about other ways to get vehicles in here.
Different fleet
Right.
management.
So we've decided to take that vehicle request out of the budget and to see what happens with those conversations that John Melvin is having and you all are having. We are getting to a point, we replaced the van last year, 2 years ago. We did buy a transport vehicle last year. We are likely to have, we returned about $100,000 to you every year. I think that I've been in a position to talk to you about it, just because you budget monies and then people leave and positions are open for periods of time and other things happen, supply budgets don't get spent to their extent, and we are fortunate that we have significant grant funding. About a third of our total budget comes from grants, and we obviously try to maximize those grant dollars, and that sometimes results in general fund dollars being unspent. So you may see a request from us before the end of this year to shift some dollars to replace another transport vehicle before the end of this year, because unfortunately we're at a point where we have not had a new vehicle, new to us vehicle, a retired vehicle coming to us in several years, and those vehicles are breaking down. We've had one vehicle that already the county maintenance folks have told us they just aren't going to fix anymore, which is where the van was 2 years ago. So, but I do not have a vehicle request in this year's budget. The flip side of that is, boy, compared to that, the probate increase looks gargantuan, doesn't it? And
I do have a question on the
go ahead.
on the juvenile budget. The revenues,
Yes.
we've gone 2016 was 229,000, 2017 through 10 months is 218,000.
Right.
So it'll probably be 250-ish, 245, 50,
And then we've got a projected 217.5.
17 in next year.
Part of that is that, if you look at our actual last year in 16 was 229. And actually, I suspect that by the end of this year, we'll probably end up in that 229 ballpark. The year before that, in 15, it was 267. We are not a significant revenue generating, unlike the prosecutor's office. I think Carol made some comment to me in the County Prosecutor O'Brien made some comment to me in the hallway that they may actually have been revenue generating last year. I know the clerk's office, the county clerk's office, is revenue generating with the title fees. Because we are dealing now exclusively with juveniles in these cases, at best, these kids are working minimum wage at McDonald's. These kids don't have significant financial resources, and the vast majority of folks who come to us have significant financial problems already when they come to us. So our rate of collection on court costs is not spectacularly high. It's actually higher than the average for juvenile courts as a field, but it's not particularly high as a percentage of total court costs that are assigned. And again, it's because most of these kids, aren't working or are working a minimum number of hours at minimum wage work, and B, we lose the ability to continue to try to collect costs from them when they turn 21. We lose all jurisdiction over them at age 21. So if a juvenile commits an assault or a theft offense at 17 and a half, our ability to collect is not indefinite. on those court costs. What we've lost is the filing fees that are associated with domestic relations cases. So it used to be that if you came into the juvenile court to file a custody case, if you came into the juvenile court to file for a change in parenting time, visitation, you had to pay a court cost to even get that action initiated unless you could show that you were an indigent adult who could not afford to pay that court cost. So the $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 that you're seeing that's different in income is presumably shifted over into Judge Fuller's budget on the domestic relations side as income. It's still coming into the county as income. It's still court costs being paid in those custody and parenting time cases, but those cases are no longer in my court. Those cases are now in the domestic relations court. And again, those are the cases that came into juvenile court that involved adults who were working and presumably could pay. The logical extension of the question for you should be, well, can't the parents of those juveniles be asked to pay those costs? And indeed, there are costs that we assign to the parents of juveniles who come in. There are probation fees and others. There is no clear delineation in the statutes at the moment about the division of costs between juveniles and juveniles' parents in juvenile delinquency, unruly, and traffic cases. There is an omnibus juvenile statute, which Representative Rezovic in Dayton has filed, and he came to the Juvenile Judges Association beforehand and said, what would you like me to put in here? What changes do you need to see? I'm on the Juvenile Law and Procedure Committee that had that conversation with him. We did not discuss court costs with him, interestingly, but somebody must have put that bug in his ear, because when the bill got filed, one of the things that's in that legislative proposal is a removal of this gray area between the juvenile and the juvenile's parents when it comes to court costs, fines, and fees associated with juvenile delinquency cases, so that we no longer have to play the game of, is this a juvenile cost or is this a parent cost? It's a cost associated to the juvenile and the juvenile's parents, and how they make the decision to divide that cost would then be up to them. The question is whether the state legislature is going to be willing to say to the parents of 16 and 17-year-olds who commit delinquency acts that the financial responsibility of their child's actions is going to be assigned to them. And that's really a public policy decision the state legislature is going to have to make as they consider that bill. So hopefully we'll get some clarity there next year as part of that. And that's probably 5 times as long an answer as you want. But did I actually answer your question?
Yeah, I understand.
Real quick, in addition to that, we've got a source point grant that we currently house in the juvenile court, but because we are moving the guardianship program in its entirety into the probate court, that $9,000 is also now shifted to the revenue in the probate court line.
But the good news is it's going to be more than we think. We hope it's going to be more than $9,000. They haven't done the grant announcements yet. Right. It's going to be more than $9,000 next year. So that's a great segue over to the probate court budget. Probate court went up 3% last year. You have a probate request in front of you, as I said, that probably makes your eyes bug out because it looks like it doesn't look like it is. 23% higher than last year. The interesting thing I would tell you before I say anything else is, and I'm not sure that this is helping me or hurting me, as a dollar-for-dollar increase, I believe it's actually less than the 2.11% juvenile increase. The juvenile increase is, as I said, is 2.11% from last year, but it's an actual increase, well, it's not quite less, but the juvenile is an actual increase of some $71,000. The probate increase is $137,000, and that's significantly larger, but the probate budget is so much smaller that it looks like this gargantuan increase in the probate budget. A small portion of that is the 3% salary adjustments that you all have told us that we can do, and the increases in health insurance costs for those employees. The majority of that, and the rest of it, almost in its entirety, can be assigned to adult guardianship cases and the manner in which we are trying to get ahead of the coming wave in these adult guardianship cases. I sent you all an immensely long email, both my narrative in it and in particular the attachment to it. The attachment, I think, was some 40 pages. I have given you today a photocopied version of the center section of that, which is about 10 pages. And I noted in the email I sent to you that this is being referred to as the silver tsunami by folks who work in gerontology. We are at a point right now where there are 26 million Americans above the age of 70, but there are 73 million Americans between the ages of 52 and 70, 66 million Americans between the ages of 36 and 51 who are quickly going to be aging into that population where we generally see guardianship cases. And in fact, if you look, it's the 10th page back in this, so toward the end of this section that I handed you today, this first page of 2 pages of population pyramids shows you that the current population pyramid, this is from the Scripps Gerontology Center for Ohio. And you can see it's a pretty sort of monolithic pyramid. There aren't huge bulges in that. But what's next to it is the Delaware County chart. And you can see because of our population growth, and because our population growth has been largely younger families moving into the county, our population looks very different from an age graph standpoint than the state's population does. We have a huge bulge in that 10 to 14 range, and in general between 5 and 20. And a huge bulge in that 40 to 50 range that you see here, and a much, much narrower pyramid at the top end. If you flip to the next page, the projection for 2030, you can see Delaware County begins to look much more like the state as a whole, and that those large population sections now are between really 45 and 70, and that population continuing to age beyond that. The next pages after that come from, again, the Scripps Gerontology Center at Miami University. And what I want to point out to you there is it is estimated that right now, Ohio's over 60 population is 34,000. That by 2030, Ohio's over 60 population is going to be 65,000. It's going to double over that 15-year period. The number of persons over the age of 60 with severe physical or cognitive disabilities, 18% right now, 1,800 right now, estimated to be almost 4,000 by 2030, again, more than doubling of that number of folks, and you see those numbers graphed on the page after that. This is not merely a projection. We are already seeing it in actual numbers of adult guardianship cases that are being filed here with the court. And unfortunately, what we're seeing as well are adult guardianship cases where there is no one who can serve as guardian for these folks who are in need, for the wards who are in need of a guardian. There is no family member out there who can do it. There is no spouse or child who can serve, or in some cases no parent who can serve for an adult child that they have. In those cases, we have a couple of limited options as to what we can do in order to get a guardian appointed for these folks who the law says need a guardian.
Are they typically indigent?
I don't want to say they're typically indigent, but many of them are. Typically, to me, would suggest that a majority of them are indigent. I wouldn't say that a majority of them are indigent, but enough of them are indigent that it is generating a significant amount of costs associated with it.
Are the guardianship fees, if they're capable of paying, are they responsible for paying those?
Correct. If they have a significant enough estate that the fees can come out of their estate, then their estate pays for those fees. Those may be folks who have a steady source of income in some way. Those may be folks who have an income from Social Security or other benefits or from a retirement. They may be folks who have significant savings, and those savings can be used because the fees are not necessarily significant in a year. By significant, I mean they may not exceed $3,000 to $5,000 in a year, or in some cases that are very complex, $6,000 or $7,000 in a year. But when we have 700, 800 of those cases, even if a small percentage of those folks are indigent and have no family member available for them, the fees begin to rack up very quickly. And again, what you saw in the email that I sent to you is that very rapidly over the last 7 to 10 years, we have gone from spending in the range of $25,000 or so a year to appoint attorneys in indigent guardianship cases to last year 127, I believe was the number.
We're on track for spending 122 at the
Okay,
end of this year.
thank you. And frankly, I suspect on track means, given the amount we've spent, if you take the amount we have currently spent and you project it over the rest of the year. I appreciate Karen's math in that. I suspect the number is going to be much higher than that, because I suspect that attorneys are waiting until the end of the year to file, and that there's going to be, because there typically is, a peak at the end of the year. We have examined all the places we can to find services. The Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging, which quite appropriately calls itself the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging, not COAA, which is what it would be if you tried to make it an acronym. And I have suggested to them that they do that. They don't like that idea. They run a volunteer guardianship program in which they train the volunteer guardians and assign guardians. Just a few years ago, we had only a handful of cases, probably enough that I could count them without taking off my shoes. And through conversations with them, they have begun to take significantly more cases from us. But they will take only cases that are guardian of the person only, where they do not need to manage the finances for that person. So either there is someone able to manage the finances, or the person has a payee, someone, an agency typically, or a nursing home, which accepts Social Security payments, Medicaid payments directly to them, and manages the finances for them. In circumstances where someone is indigent, in need of a guardian, and does not have an appropriate person to serve as their guardian, we have to appoint an attorney in those cases. And we've done several things to try and reduce or to control what really has been this rapid increase in spending in those areas. The first is that we instituted a cap several years ago, and this year I lowered that cap. So regardless of how much work the attorneys do in those cases, they're paid public defender rates, $50 an hour, same as we pay the public defenders in criminal cases. But there is a cap, and they know that if they exceed the cap, it doesn't matter how many more hours they work, they can only bill to the cap in any given year. And we have a number of cases where attorneys bill to the cap, and they're essentially working gratis from that point on. We have adopted local rules and local training requirements to allow non-attorneys to work in those cases. Often these folks have a social work background, and we pay those folks at an hourly rate significantly lower, roughly half what we're paying the attorneys in those cases. We've had a very difficult time finding non-attorneys to take that work. We do have a few folks who are doing that right now and who are serving in that capacity, and we're attempting to recruit additional folks. And the third thing that we have done currently done, is initiate the court visitor program to attempt to retain the family member and kinship guardians, so they may not be family members, they may be family friends, who are in those cases, to try and eliminate the need to replace those guardians with attorney guardians in those cases. There's one other thing that we're doing, but it's on the horizon, and I detailed this in the email to you. About 4 or 5 years ago now, there was a series of newspaper articles in the Columbus Dispatch about the guardianship system in Franklin County. In fact, the sort of central focus of that was an attorney in Franklin County who had 600 and some wards. That was his business. That attorney ended up being disbarred, and subsequent, don't remember now whether he was suspended or actually disbarred. There was disciplinary action against him, and ultimately he took his own life following that series and the action that was taken against him by the Supreme Court on his license. Subsequent to that, the Ohio General Assembly instituted a program for Franklin County only as sort of a pilot project that allowed Franklin County to start a guardianship board. That guardianship board in Franklin County is jointly funded by the county through the probate court, by the mental health agency in Franklin County, and by the Board of Developmental Disabilities in Franklin County. So the major agencies that see adult wards as their clients. They employ a guardian who is sort of the board employs a guardian, who is sort of the central employee of the board. And then the guardian hires additional persons to serve as guardians for wards in those cases, who again tend to have a social work background or something of that nature as their training, and who are paid an appropriate rate for the work they're doing, but a fraction, 40 or so % of what the court would be paying to attorneys to do that work. We pay attorneys because we know they're qualified to do that work, but frankly what they're doing is work for the wards is frequently not legal work. It's managing the ward's affairs, it's arranging their financial situations, making sure they're in an appropriate housing situation, making sure the bills in that housing situation are paid. I went to the probate judges this last year and said, we are rapidly going to get to a point in Delaware County where I am not going to be able to go to the commissioners every year and ask for another $25,000 to $50,000 to pay for additional indigent guardianship fees. But in fact, what you have in front of you is a budget that asks for $25,000 additional dollars for indigent guardianship fees. $25,000 of that increase in the probate budget is additional guardianship fees for next year for what we anticipate to be continually increasing costs in that area. The probate judges, when I had that conversation with them, agreed that it was appropriate to take the Franklin County model and make it available statewide. In fact, in particular, Judge Puffenberger, who is the Lucas County probate judge in Toledo, is very anxious to do the same thing. So just 2 weeks ago, there was filed a legislative proposal with the General Assembly that would allow, actually it might have been last week, that would allow probate judges statewide to form a similar board. I actually drafted the language for that legislative proposal. I have had extensive conversations with our Board of Developmental Disabilities and our Mental Health Board. I cannot speak for them and guarantee that they are involved, but they are certainly interested in seeing a guardianship board of that nature. And what you got via email from me, that 40-page or so document, was what I originally sent to them at the beginning of 2017, detailing what financial contribution they would need to make as well for that to occur. I've additionally had conversations with folks at SourcePoint, and they are very interested in seeing that become a reality in the county, and including the potential of making some grant dollars available for that as well. Given where we are, I can't imagine that legislative action, if it passes next year, is going to happen before they come back at the end of the summer, and perhaps not until the lame duck session at the end of next year. I don't think it's going to be particularly controversial in any way, but just knowing the timeline, it's just been filed, we're going to have a break here soon. I don't expect to see it pass before spring, if not perhaps post-election in the lame duck session next year. But my hope is that as early as 2019, we may be talking about forming a guardianship board in Delaware County and looking to multiple joint funding partners to do that. That will drastically, I don't know that it will drastically immediately reduce our costs, because there will be the immediate cost of hiring the guardian and hiring persons to serve as guardians in those cases, and we'll have to begin to make a shift from attorneys to a guardianship board when it happens. But I am confident in telling you that if we don't do something about this, what is $125,000 or $150,000 right now will easily be $500,000 or more in 15 years, easily, if not significantly more than that. And so what we're trying to do right now is get ahead of the curve on that spending. What you see in the probate budget is also a shift of some funds from juvenile to probate. So frankly, the reason juvenile is 2.11 and not 3 or 3 1/4 to you this year is that right now we have part-time the court visitor program. The court visitor program is, I will pat us on the back and say, an award-winning program that we have, that I would love to say was my idea. Wasn't my idea. It was actually the Stark County Probate Courts idea, and we stole it from them. And they had a similar program that started about 5 years ago, and it worked so well up there that we decided to do it down here. The Court Visitor Program trains volunteers to go out into the homes of these folks who, to the wards' homes, to check on whether they are receiving appropriate services from guardians and to assist the guardians to try and keep family guardians in those cases. And to report back to the court to make sure that if the wards are not being appropriately cared for, we know that, so we can take appropriate action and wards don't come to harm in those cases. Right now, that program is run part-time by Teresa Tackett. You all know Teresa as having been Judge Spicer's right-hand person and my right-hand person over the last couple of years. Teresa's salary right now is in the juvenile budget entirely. Her salary, her benefits are entirely within the juvenile budget. This budget, and the reason probate is so large, moves her entire compensation from juvenile to probate. Because our proposal next year is to make that court visitor program her full-time job. On the juvenile side, you say, but Judge, who's going to keep your calendar and make sure you're in the places that you're supposed to be in? Because I'm really bad at being in the places I'm supposed to be in, because I'm supposed to be in a lot of different places. And the answer is, that's that internal shift I mentioned to you about not filling a clerical position. We're going to move folks around. In clerical, we're going to have somebody who's already there in clerical, assuming that this budget gets approved, assuming that request gets approved, move over and do that work for me. We're going to have somebody who's currently not typing in the courtroom, shift and do typing in the courtroom, and one of the magistrates has indicated that she does not need as much assistance in the courtroom as she's currently getting, so we're able to make that shift in juvenile without adding a person, which is why the juvenile request is 2.11%. Teresa's full compensation is in the budget, salary, benefits, PERS contribution, all of that, everything put together, and she's worth every penny and twice that, is just under $89,000. So if you add Teresa's and then you add the $25,000 we've added, that's almost $114,000 right there, and the total probate increase for you is $138,000. The difference is the 3% salary and the health insurance increases. That is the entire probate difference from last year to this year. We could have left Teresa, we could have made Teresa full-time in the court visitor program and left her in the juvenile line.
But you wouldn't have had a 2.1 increase then. You'd had a bigger increase.
It would, like I said, it would have been about 3%. Yeah, it would have been in the ballpark of 3%. And frankly, if I come to you with a 3 or 3.25 or 3.5% increase in juvenile and a 3 or 4% increase in probate, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. Honestly, Cy probably would have called me and said, yeah, you don't need to come in for a budget hearing. But I thought that was dishonest. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to make that change and to shift her actual work into probate, but not shift the dollars into probate. And that's where we're spending those dollars next year if you approve this budget. And I didn't think it was honest of me to hide those dollars in the juvenile budget and try and slide it through without telling you what we were actually doing with those dollars. So what we're actually doing with those dollars is moving that over to probate. Right now, Teresa has, I think, 6 volunteers in that, 6, thank you, volunteers in that court visitor program. I would love to see that number triple, or more than triple, quadruple next year, because right now she's handling everything for me about 75% of her time, and addressing the court visitor program about 25% of her time. And if you approve this budget, the court visitor program will be 100% of her time, and those are volunteers. The only cost associated with the court visitor program is Teresa's time. But you are not paying all that time, because as Karen indicated earlier, right now we have a grant through SourcePoint for that program, which is $9,000. We went back to SourcePoint this year and indicated to them that we wanted to make that program full-time. We have asked them for $17,000 for next year out of that program, and that amount is reflected in the probate income budget. So what you see in probate income last year was $104,000, and you see, or $119,000, 104 actual so far, and what you see on the income side is $143,000 for next year. I don't have that money yet. SourcePoint has not made their grant announcements. But they were so enthusiastic about this program that I am confident that they're going to fund it at a level certainly higher than the 9,000 they did last year. And frankly, if we get to 15, 20, 25 volunteers in this program, we're going to ask them for more than $17,000 in 2019 to fund the program. Because right now it's really doing great work. Every time we have a situation where a ward raises an issue, a nursing home raises an issue, a physician raises an issue about level of care, EMS calls us, or APS, the Adult Protective Services folks through David Dabrowski's shop, come to us and say, hey, we have a concern about this person. Rather than immediately conduct a hearing or potentially remove that ward or have to appoint an attorney in those cases, Teresa or one of her volunteers go out and file a substantial report back with the probate court then about exactly what's going on in that case and what interventions we can make to keep the existing family or volunteer guardian in that case and not have to appoint an attorney. I feel like I'm chicken littling you here in talking about the sky falling on these probate guardianship cases, but that's why I brought this information again into you today. I don't think if we're talking about going from 30,000 folks in that category now to 65,000 folks in that category in 15 years, and where we have gone from spending $25,000 or so 7 or 8 years ago on indigent guardians to what's going to be $125,000 or more, and what we've budgeted for $150,000 next year, those numbers are going to continue to go up, and in fact, we expect that pace to accelerate. So I realize this is both a shift in money, but also an ask for additional money in those areas. But I also wanted to give you a clear picture of what we are trying to. I have gone so far as to draft a statute and find a sponsor for that statute to try and get us to a point where we can form our own guardianship board, hopefully in 19, and try and get ahead of this problem so that I'm not back here, hopefully, me, or some other probate juvenile judge in 15 years asking the commissioners for $500,000 or more to fund this. I didn't do the math, and I should have had this number at my fingertips. If we had not moved Teresa out of the juvenile budget, given that our increase in juvenile is $71,000, and that was a 2.11% increase. If we had not moved Teresa out of that budget, it would be 3.94.
3%. I did math.
You did the math? Okay. So it would have been 3% in juvenile and essentially 2.5% probably to 3% in probate.
Yeah. No, that's great.
I tell you with some hopefully he doesn't get mad at me for saying this, that when I sent you all the email a week or two ago sort of outlining these changes, I walked into Cy's office afterwards and he said, boy, you really shot yourself in the foot. And I think what Cy was telling me is, we could have left this where it was and made it look like a 3% or so increase across the board, and it wouldn't have looked like much of anything. But as I said, I really didn't think that was being honest with you about where we were spending the dollars. I hope over the last 10 years or so, and the time that you all have been here, the probate juvenile court has established a tradition of coming to you and asking you for only what we actually need, and not asking you for things that we don't need. It's why I went so far as to point out to you things that we talked about including in the budget and decided not to include. I will tell you that vehicle purchase, we took out, Karen came to me and she said, Judge, if we include that, it's 2.85% or something like that. And I said, no, take it out. I'm not sure we need it. B, I know we're talking about doing something else with vehicles. And C, I want to be able to go to the commissioners and say to them that we are giving them a budget that asks for only what we actually need next year. And I have talked way longer than I expected.
You have.
So I'm going to stop talking. You give a lawyer the platform, and
You
that's
rest
what I
your
mean.
case. Very good, Judge. Very good.
This felt like an oral argument. I feel like I'm in front of the Court of Appeals.
What is the name of the bill that's been introduced? I mean, I'm sorry, the number.
The number, it's in the, I'll have to look it up. It's in the three.
Just Yeah, just
80s.
send
I
it.
can send it to you. via
Yeah,
email.
just send it, yeah. That'd be great. And the prime sponsor, too, I know you mentioned him.
Well, Representative Rezabec sponsored the juvenile bill that relates to court costs.
Okay.
Somebody, actually, Judge Brekamp in Paulding County asked me the other day who sponsored the probate bill, and I told him that both Representative Rezabec and Senator Bacon were considering it, and I'm not
Okay.
sure which side it actually got filed. I think it got filed on the House side,
Okay.
and if it did, it was probably, again, Jeff Rezabec.
Okay.
Jeff is an attorney who does a substantial probate practice privately,
Okay.
as Senator Bacon actually has a substantial
Does
probate
he?
practice
Okay.
in his private law firm. Interesting note about Representative Rezabec, I went down for another bill that he was a co-sponsor on, and he and I got to talking, and he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from the Buffalo, New York area originally." And he said, "Funny, so am I." And I said, "Oh, we went to the same high school."
Oh, my
In this
gosh.
little town of about 20,000 people in upstate New York, grew up about 2 miles away from one another. And somehow I ended up here in Delaware, and he ended up in Dayton.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
And didn't know that until last year. But other questions about our probate budget, about...
Three things. First of all, just a question of curiosity. The people who need guardianship, they're not capable, I assume they don't have family that local,
Well,
or they outlive their family,
Yeah, well, a lot of folks who have guardians have a family member as their guardian.
or their family can't be trusted.
Yeah. So the situations where we end up appointing an attorney in those cases is often there just isn't family. There isn't anybody around, or for reasons those folks are not appropriate. If there's going to be a guardian of both the person and the estate, so not only the guardian of the person means choices about their care, about where they're going to be living, guardian of the estate has control over their money. If there's going to be a guardian over the estate or over the person and the estate, there's also a residency requirement. So they may have a child who lives in Florida or Arizona or
So
California.
a child in Florida couldn't do it?
Depending upon the circumstances, they may not be able to. Yeah, that happens a lot.
I have two other quick comments to be real quick. One is the vehicles. That is going to be an evaluation. It's planned, I think, the first quarter of next year. And so
I don't want to be buying cars every year. I really don't.
And I think if it goes the way the presentation was, I think it's going to be a plus for the whole county. So, and the only other thing I have is, you're a judge, but I don't know of a judge that does a better job of presenting their case and have such a good handle about the numbers as you do. And I'm always amazed, I'm always impressed, and you never fail. Every year it's the same way. My compliments.
It comes from having been court administrator for 9 years and having been in charge of putting that budget together. You had to know in that job where the dollars were. And I like numbers.
So you're a better judge or a better administrator?
I don't think I can answer that question without patting myself on the back in some way and shooting myself in the foot in the other.
You don't have to answer the question.
I think I'm better in the courtroom. There's a reason.
You're also an outstanding judge, so you don't have to answer. I'll answer it.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Well, I would definitely take that compliment from Commissioner Merrill. That is not given lightly.
Thank you.
Is that a compliment to me or this all?
No comment.
Questions? Comments?
Boy, you've explained things so well. On the court visitor program, the fact that you can get volunteers to actually be qualified, what do you look for in the...
First of all, a willingness to do it. We have volunteers from a variety of backgrounds. We have a couple of volunteers right now who are lawyers.
Okay.
We
Okay.
have our former probate court administrator, Sue Catherman, who's retired, is one of our volunteers in that program. I've gone to, Teresa went and spoke at Rotary. We had a volunteer come out of that program. We've talked to Kiwanis clubs. We've gone to volunteer fairs. We've got information up through SourcePoint, through the Connections Volunteer Center here in town. I'll talk to anybody about that. I've written Gazette columns about that program. We had a volunteer come out of a Gazette column I wrote. The concern, obviously, with those programs is that you're sending folks into a situation that you don't really know. And we've actually had a couple of, Teresa had a situation recently in which we were concerned that someone had actually followed her away from the home. afterwards. So we've actually called law enforcement a couple of times
Sure.
in those cases, but the vast majority of those situations are, adults who are in need of some assistance, somebody who's willing to provide that assistance for them, who may be a family friend even. We just had obviously I can't go into names, but we just had a ward in an adult guardianship pass away. She was 103, and I did her initial guardianship hearing about 10, 12 years ago. And she did not have any children. She was in her early 90s at the time. And she came into court, and there were some family members who were available, and ultimately one of those family members ended up serving as her guardian. But she had a gentleman who worked farmland that she and her late husband owned, and she wanted that gentleman to be her guardian. She trusted him. They'd been in business together for years. He had helped her voluntarily for years. And she had nieces and nephews who were around and who were not necessarily inappropriate. But here was this man who she'd worked with. She knew he worked hard to work the land around her house, and she trusted him with her money more than she trusted anybody else. And she wanted him to be her guardian. And he did so for years. Frankly, he predeceased her. He did it for about 10 years until he passed away. And so the situations vary from case to case depending upon what the circumstances are.
Do these guardians have any liability, or and does the county take care of them in those cases?
Well, one of the issues that was coming up in those cases was that the guardians were not always fulfilling their responsibilities. The Ohio Supreme Court adopted a series of superintendent's rules, and we've adopted a series of local requirements that anybody who's serving as a guardian on a volunteer basis or as an attorney, so through a volunteer guardian program or through the court, is required to complete ongoing training. Anybody who's a family member is required to complete a training program which aims really more at what their responsibilities and liabilities are as the guardian, which Magistrate Kaiser and the clerks in our probate court put on Saturday every couple of months. And the magistrate comes in on his own time on Saturday mornings and does that program for those family member guardians. We did that actually before the Supreme Court even required that training. And we also now have a limitation that no one can have more than 30 guardianships. I mentioned that gentleman in Franklin County had something like 600 guardianships. So we have one attorney who is at that 30 limit, who does a wonderful job for the award she has, but she's hit that cap of 30. Generally, our attorneys who handle these cases have a handful. We only have 6 or 7 attorneys right now who are handling those cases because, again, they end up working for free by the end of the year because of the caps. They end up hitting that cap, and they can't stop helping the ward, and they know that they take on that responsibility, but they really do it as a service to the court and to the county. And I cannot thank them enough for the work they do in those cases because they do a great job. No.
I want to thank you, Judge, for being so proactive in approaching your cohorts that are probate judges too, and then taking it to the association, and then taking it to the legislature, and coming up with sponsors and starting that process. The legislative process is often a long one.
It will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, but you know, and so many things have to be taken into account on that, and I really congratulate you. And on both points, I mean, finding a creative solution, the best solution, and is...
Well, my hope is that this will be a collaborative solution with a number of other agencies in the county. I need to apologize. The bill number that was in my head, which is actually 394, is the juvenile bill, where we were talking about court costs. That's Jeff Rezovic's bill.
Okay.
I saw in an email from the judicial conference a note that the probate bill had been filed, but I do not see it on the list of pending legislation.
Okay.
So it's possible that the status report just hasn't been updated yet to include that bill number, or it's possible that it's about to be filed and they jumped the gun by telling us that it had been.
That's a House bill, 394?
394 is the House bill. That's Jeff Rezovic's bill on the juvenile court costs. I'll let you know the probate
That's
bill.
great, because often we can make sure that our legislators are aware of it and what a great idea it is.
And I have already on the probate bill talked to Representative Brenner and to
great.
Representative Carfagna. Actually, I had talked to them initially about sponsoring the bill, and then there was already a probate bill that was in the works, so we didn't end up needing to do that, though they may end up signing on as co-sponsors. But they had both indicated that they would be supportive of the bill.
Great.
I simply just have not seen Senator Jordan to talk to him about it, but will when I get the opportunity.
Great. Thank you.
Again, I don't know if there's anything controversial about that. We're not requiring that counties take that action. We're simply taking the Franklin County model and
Yes.
making it available. The other thing we did, which was not in the original draft that I put together, but that other judges asked for, which makes complete sense, is allow counties to form joint guardianship boards, particularly the smaller counties will do that. But we did it with our cost program with Union County, so I could see,
Right.
for example, our mental health board is multi-county, so I could see our mental health board wanting to
Yes.
do that over multiple counties.
Well, spreading it close to that lead person over a larger area would be
Right.
a good thing.
That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would like to thank you for thinking about the future, strategically thinking, looking out 5, 10, 15 years.
Well, and I will pass that thanks on to Magistrate Kaiser, who was the first one he was at a conference, which you all paid for him to go to, out of our budget. You all approved the expenditure out of our budget. And he came back from that conference with that Scripps gerontology data, and we sat down and he said, you need to look at this.
Yeah.
We knew, obviously, that our numbers were going up because we'd lowered the cap this year. But when we looked at what the projections were 5, 10, 15 years out, we clearly are going to have to do something different than we're currently
Yeah.
doing.
Again, that's great strategic thinking and
Yes.
visionary thinking.
Yes.
That's
It's just looking at the numbers.
Really is.
huge service to the county. I did have some questions in a couple other areas, municipal
Please.
court and then the youth service. On the muni court,
Which one, I'm sorry?
municipal court,
That was placed there.
oh,
He doesn't have any.
I was going to say,
That's not my budget.
I didn't understand why that was one of my questions.
That was there incorrectly.
Okay, good.
That's my fault.
I'd be happy to ask Judge Hemmer and Judge Sonneman questions about the municipal court. but That's not my bailiwick.
Okay.
But on the, did you say youth services?
So I put that in as a red here, no, a test.
Just to
See if
throw
you
you-
were paying attention.
Did you say there was a question about the youth services?
Yeah, youth service.
Which, let me see, let me find that.
Yeah, we're,
The revenues,
Youth service diversion, is that 267-26324, is that the one you have?
I'm not sure. I had the muni thing all teed up, and now I got to find the youth services. In this maze of...
well, now you're ready when the Muni Court
Yeah.
judges come.
267 is our Department of Youth Services project that we've got. And for this year, the requirement was to show all of our expenses and our revenue down to the child keys. So while the 3-year budget to actual does not print out for the rest of the revenue and expenses, it's a separate report that needed to be run. It looks very different. I apologize. It looks like
That's
this.
explains why I'm not finding it.
Sorry.
Youth service diversion.
Where are you?
It's board key 267-26324.
I'm sorry, say
This
it
one
again.
here.
Say again?
Oh, okay.
467.
So that's,
First of all, what is it?
it's our Department of Youth Services grant that we've got. This past year, they required a rebuild of the program and to shift several of the, instead of all of our intake workers and all of our diversion workers being paid for from a single program, we now have the diversion program being paid by one, the diversion officer being paid by one program and all of our intake being paid by a separate program. So the costs are just differently distributed for this coming year.
Which is why you see that huge number in 17. It jumps to 493. If you want a more year-to-year budget, you can see the state subsidy 245 in 15, 245 in 16, 238 in 18. That 17 number is off because of the the DYS rebuild threw numbers together in an org key that then get broken back apart into two different org keys again next year.
Okay, so which is the other org key that would
It's
show?
also a 267, 26323. That currently has 0 in it. It had been used as a parent key, I believe, and now we have all the child keys that roll up to it. So I believe we've got at least 8 different programs that are not listed in the 3 years actual because this is the first year that required the distribution of the income.
Our DYS grant is not substantially different. It changes a little bit from year to year depending upon our usage of bed days in DYS.
So it's just a change in...
It's
where
an
the
accounting
money's-
change,
Okay,
not an actual
okay.
change in income. The DYS grant comes in 2 parts. There's a DYS base grant, which is based on the decennial census. So our amount will go up in 2021 after the census figures come out in 2020. And it went up in 2010, and then it doesn't change for 10 years. And then there is a rolling 10-year average. That's the Reclaim Ohio grant, which is an average of our number of felony adjudications against the number of bed days that we use in Department of Youth Services facilities. The theory being the fewer kids we send to DYS, the more of those kids we are keeping in the community, and therefore should have those funds locally to keep those kids in the community. Different courts have different philosophies about DYS. So our population is 200,000. We send 1 to 2 children a year to a traditional DYS facility and 3 to 6 to a community correction facility, which are a little more treatment-oriented and we tend to have better outcomes from. Licking County...
What's the difference in those 2 facilities?
DYS is akin to the adult prison system.
Okay.
The last young man I sent to a straight DYS facility had committed a rape offense. I first sent him to a community correction facility. He successfully completed the community correction facility, and actually I had some high hopes for him because he had a vocational training program available to him and some other things. He ultimately did not enter into that vocational program, got into a couple of fights, went AWOL on us for a period of time. And at that point, he was too much of a public safety risk for me to justify keeping him in the community, and I sent him to the straight DYS facility. And that's, while there are treatment programs there, it's the equivalent of an adult prison system.
Okay.
The community correction facilities tend to be in the range of 9 months, 8 to 12 is what they tell us. But they're very small facilities, usually around 20 kids in each facility. They are locked and secure. But we did have a juvenile about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, escape from one of those facilities by diving under the walker of a grandmother who had come to visit another youth at the facility. But they are locked facilities. And they are very, very treatment-oriented. Most of the kids who go there leave with a high school diploma. They leave with extensive mental health and drug and alcohol counseling. And we've had some kids make just remarkable turnarounds.
Oh, good,
In those facilities. A DYS stay is typically minimum 6 months. If it's a serious enough offense, it's a minimum 1 year, and then it's to age 21 maximum. The correctional facility, the community correctional facility stays, as I said, are 8 to 12, usually in the range of 9 or 10 months, but we get charged bed days differently. So every day that a juvenile is at DYS, it's a bed day. Every day that a juvenile is at a CCF facility, it's 2/3 of a bed day. So it counts a little differently against our bed days. So we tend to send more kids to the CCF because we have better outcomes, and because it's actually less of a financial cost to the county. So if I'm going to spend less and get a better outcome, that seems like the way to go in those cases. Licking County, and this is not a knock by any means against Judge Hoover in Licking County, but he just has a different philosophy than we do. Their population is about 155, 165,000. They'll send 20, 25 kids, I think, in any given year, sometimes more, sometimes less, to the straight DYS facility.
Oh.
But Judge Hoover will often send them for a short period of time and then give them judicial release, or what's called in the adult system shock probation. So sort of hey, here's what this facility looks like. You really don't want to go back, do you? And then let kids out into more traditional supervision afterwards. So just different philosophies about how we handle those kids. But what it means is that our DYS bed days tend to be pretty low. And as a result, on the reclaim formulation, we get in any given year around between $550,000 and $600,000 total between the two grants back from the state. Is the 245
It's 238
is that the base, is the base grant. So 238 is the base grant, it doesn't change in that 10-year period, and then the 350-ish, which varies up and down depending on our bed day usage, is the reclaimed dollars. We use those to pay probation officers, we use those dollars to pay for the Family Advocate Program, we use those dollars to pay for a variety of things that I would otherwise be asking you for dollars for from the general fund. That allow us to keep those kids in the community and treat them in the community as opposed to having to pay to lock them up, which we know is generally ineffective, generally very expensive, and generally increases the rate of recidivism for those kids when they come back to the community. And what I don't want to do is just take 16 and 17-year-olds and train them to be adult criminals, which is the problem otherwise if we just lock them up and don't do anything else in that time period. People ask me, what's your goal with these kids? And I tell them my goal is to have productive adults who are not involved in the criminal justice system. And we get there different ways with different kids, but that's our goal with all of these youngsters who come to us, is to get them to that point at age 18.
Thank you.
I didn't really have anything else. Again, I compliment you all three of you, for being such good stewards, of the county's taxpayer money and understanding the numbers so well. That's so helpful to us. So again, thank you all. And then looking out long-term on the horizon, that's extremely helpful as well.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah, if we could get summaries, of these org keys, that's got to come out of our group. But if we could get summaries, that would really help us, because
Sure.
we're
And in
leafing
particular, we
through
can
dozens of pages trying to find one of the org keys, and it's confusing to us.
We can also try and give you a clearer explanation of why those numbers shifted around on the
Yeah,
UAS.
and when you shift stuff internally, if you roll it up to the top, it doesn't become an explanation. So, again.
Part of the shift is due to the rebuild of DYS. They've asked us to really double down on our scrutiny of how we spend the grant funds. They're no longer interested in paying people to chase kids around all day. They really want to see that we're using evidence-based programming that works. And so they want to know who's in what program, what programming are you using, and that's part of why they've asked us to break all that out, is so that they can see who we're funding, what they're trained in, and how this is actually going to make these kids more productive citizens and not just chasing them around.
Okay. Again, thank you all very much. And Jennifer's still here? Oh, there she is. We will
We are recessed
until 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Who gets to come in at 9:30 tomorrow morning?
Data.
Data?
And then tomorrow afternoon is Finance Authority and Economic Development, so.
They were hard